Okay, you're on, Libby. Do you want to get started?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you guys so much for joining us for the Student Data Privacy District Implementation Workshop. CITE and the CCEE, the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, partnered together to create all of these amazing resources to help districts to either pick up wherever they're at in the process of building and mapping out a plan for privacy compliance, or to start from scratch. Really quick, I just want to introduce a couple people that are here. We have Ronnie Jones from the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. And we also have the amazing EdTech team at Oak Grove Elementary School to give district perspective as we go through all of these resources and talk about how to implement a successful plan. They have done so and have operated and pivoted and done all the amazing things that come along with building a compliance plan. So we have Steve Harmon, Sergio Rizzi, and Bruce Neff joined us today that you guys will also hear from. My name is Libby Garrett. I am the Director of Resource Programs here at California IT and Education. And along your path, if you have any questions, concerns, or anything that we can support you with, in addition to these resources, we have built out an amazing team who can also assist, whether it is directly from CITE or our network, which is where we pulled EdTech, the EdTech group from Oak Grove. So we have a lot of districts who are always willing to assist and help any other district who may be struggling through the process or any part thereof. Just a couple platform norms we want to go through. So ask any questions at any time using the Q&A portion. We also have Laurel Nava here from CITE. She is our Director of Education Programs, and she will be helping to monitor that Q&A as we go through. So make sure you keep your comments Q&A friendly. And if you need tech help, request it via the Q&A. So that Q&A chat will be very helpful for you guys throughout this session. So a little bit more about the CCEE partnership with CITE. We partnered together with educational leaders to identify tools, videos, courses, and of course this workshop to learn from each other and to accelerate your learning for our students while advancing equity and addressing the whole child. So you guys have at CCEE Learning Forward that's going to be happening throughout in 2021. And so you can click that link there for more information on that. But basically this partnership was pulled together to provide you guys with a lot of support and resources that districts are needing very much so right now. So some session feedback. We're going to talk about a lot of things that are very heavy topic, but if there's more topics that you guys can think of, or if there's a better way that we could have delivered the content to you, we want to know about it. So please provide feedback via that survey link, and then that helps us to continue to make sure that we are providing resources and support at the high level that we intend to for all of our users. And with that, we're going to just jump right in. So what is the history behind what it is that we're trying to accomplish here? So there have been privacy laws, if you will, or student data laws for as long as we can remember. Ferpa back in 1974, and then an exception was made to Ferpa as we kind of learned and grew. But in 2014 was really the catalyst for the work that we are now doing today with contracting and things of that nature. Mostly because the shift from pen and paper or pencil and paper shifted a little bit more in 2014 to technology based in the classroom. And so we had SOPIPA come about, the Student Online Privacy Personal Information Privacy Act. And so that really covers a lot of those elements that we were seeing back in 2014. AB 1584 was the even bigger catalyst that really drew us all together, and it put parameters on school districts that they needed to have contracts in place with every vendor that they're sharing student data with. And there was a whole list of things that had to be within that contract, and it had to be covered by both parties. And so that's really the big catalyst that really pushed us into now we need to actually implement an actual plan of attack, and we need to implement a way that we are going to keep our students safe and be compliant with the laws. In 2016, the SDPC was formed, and we began to adopt the first statewide contracts here at CITE to assist districts and vendors alike with being in compliance with all the things that are coming at us from all of these new laws. And in 2017, we began to create additional support resources. So my predecessor, Dana Greenspan, was here at CITE, assisting districts with that transition and the addition of those two new laws that she was out there educating and providing a lot of support and resources for you guys. 2018, we updated that contract I spoke about briefly, and we adopted version 2. And then in 2020, so lots of things happened in 2020. And the biggest one for us on the student privacy front was that the NDPA, the National Data Privacy Agreement, was adopted. And so that has allowed the consortium of 33 states that include California to have adopted one contract specifically. And we are now looking forward to how do we take the contract, how do we take the laws, and how do we actually implement and put a plan in place for our district to be compliant. And that leads us to the mapping and planning portion of implementation. So a lot of mapping and planning has to happen in order for a plan to be successful outside of privacy. That's just the general norm, right? For when we have to put a plan in place, a lot of mapping, a lot of really deep diving into who is this going to affect, how is it going to affect them, and is it going to provide a solution and to the problems that we need to solve by implementing this plan. And so it's really important to understand who your stakeholders are and what their perspective is. And so some of the things you're going to see today, this is basically the culmination of our entire project. So some of these things you might have seen if you joined us for our webinar. We talked about stakeholder perspective, and we break it down into 4 groups. And so for the first stakeholders that we're going to talk about, you want to make sure that you're empowering your stakeholders at the entry level with knowledge and resources. And so that includes your 4 tiers, if you will, that we talked about stakeholders. We had district leadership and school boards. A lot of times we don't talk about district leadership and school boards. And when you're implementing a plan, that's at such a high level that your school board is going to probably be involved, and your superintendent is going to need to be involved. And we're going to talk more about how do you talk to each of these groups. So technology, business, and educational services are departments that are typically left being the heads of implementing this type of plan, or helping to provide support for all the people who are using this method or this compliance on student privacy. Who do they ask those questions to? It's coming to you guys at the technology, business, and education services. And then your teachers and your staff. A lot of times plans just happen to departments, and we don't want this to be one of those plans that's implemented. And so you need to get that perspective and input from your teachers and your staff. And we'll kind of talk about how that gets folded into the plan. And of course, your students and your families. This is all happening to them and for their benefit. And so we need to know, how do we talk to and what is their perspective on all of these compliance issues and student data privacy laws. And with that, whose role is it? We talk about that all the time. Every person that we talked about, every stakeholder level has a role to play. So whether it's your families, your students, the site staff, your district staff, or your teachers, we all have a role to play in the overall. It's likened to student privacy. Keeping our students safe is likened to keeping our students safe on a playground, right? We would go to leaps and bounds to make sure that the equipment is safe, to make sure that there's monitors out there protecting our students and their physical well-being. And we need to take that approach when we talk about data. We have to keep their data safe, and everybody has a role to play in that. And so the next step is then to talk about where are you in the process. And the nice thing about this workshop is that it doesn't matter where you are in the process. Maybe you guys started the process and it kind of lost momentum. So you want a plan, but you don't currently have one. How do you create it from scratch? Or maybe you're a district who is struggling to see the need for the plan. And how can you talk about why it's important for each district to have a plan with the stakeholders that you're not familiar with talking with? And so any level that you are on, it's going to take a push from everyone. And we're going to really dive into that today and talk about how do you talk to each person at every level, and how do you impress how important it is to have such a plan in place at your district. This tool you're going to see throughout the workshop. This is the roadmap for student data privacy compliance. And so this is meant to be a guide where you guys, again, no matter where you are in the process, let's figure out where you are on the roadmap and take it from there. But these are the basic and general steps that have to be taken in order for your plan to be pushed out or implemented successfully. We have the privacy checklist. So again, all of these resources are available to you guys on our webpage, and we can put that link in the chat for you guys. It's also at the end of the session. But all of these resources are meant to be downloadable and used at your discretion. Again, wherever you are in the process, we want you guys to have easy access to all of the resources and use them as they are fit to your district. So we give the general idea, the general guidance that works for most districts, but we also know and understand that every district is different in one facet or another. And so take these tools and customize them to how is going to work best. How is it going to be best to have those conversations with each of these levels of stakeholders in your own district? So the next guidance tool that we offer up is the Student Data Privacy Compliance Checklist. So things like start with the why. You know, we talked about the history before we really dove into the session here today, and you really need to talk about the history and get people to understand that there are laws that we have to comply with. And these are the ways that we are going to keep our students safe, but still have a good opportunity to work with our vendors, a good opportunity to be transparent with our families and our stakeholders and let them know exactly what we're using in the classroom with our students, and that they have been vetted and that they are safe to use. You want to create working groups or a committee. So we talk a lot about vetting teams. That goes back to keep every level stakeholder involved in the conversation at every turn. So in implementing this in my own district prior to coming to CITE, we had your grade level chairs, your principals with the buying power, you had any teacher who was interested, or your ed tech coaches who were going to help with implementation. These are the people at the site levels or at the school levels that need to have the conversations about which applications are we looking to use, and can we fine tune that? Can we take the requests from our teaching staff from 5 different 3rd grade math apps down to maybe just 2. That's going to help to not only streamline the purchasing process, but it's also going to help streamline the learning process for your students. And what I mean by that is sometimes you have students that'll go in the same district from one school site to the other. Are we making it harder of a transition on our students and our teaching staff by having all these different applications out there and not streamlining that process a little bit more? So this goes beyond just student privacy. We are using these vetting resources and tools to make sure that the learning is not being interrupted by having to take an extra week or 2 weeks to learn and teach how to use different applications as we go. You want to talk about and review the state and federal laws. We've kind of touched on that a little bit, and we have a listing of the 4 that are the major laws here in California and federally, and we'd be happy to share that as well and expand on that if needed. And again, you can see that these resources have clickable links to all of these additional support pieces as well. So then you would want to build your project plan. And each of these correlates to additional resources, like I said. So this may be overwhelming. It may look like, okay, this is a simple checklist, but the actual things on the checklist are very involved. And they are, and we have support for all of this every step of the way. But you want to build out, what does your project plan look like? Again, you want to keep all your stakeholders involved with every process, every piece of the process. So whether you are having ongoing meetings or you're talking about what does your plan look like on a regular basis, you want to make sure that everybody is prioritizing this and reducing the risk of liability as you go through what does your plan look like. So you want to design a process for those resource reviews and approvals. So again, you would like to go back to that step 2 of using that working group. The working group is not only in place to help build the plan or the model that you're going to implement, but it is going to be paramount in using that group to help to review resources as you go through the process ongoing, not just to build the plan. And then you want to test and refine your process. So today, like I said, we're going to hear from the team at Oak Grove who has successfully implemented a plan and no doubt had to pivot and change and fine tune their process as they've gone along. And so we are going to be able to hear their process and how they have had to adjust and change things as they've gone through building of their process with the change of laws or change of contracts or change of how their workflow is at their school site. And then you want to adopt those board policies and administrative regulations. That is the big piece that it's very hard to overcome for some districts. To adopt board policies or administrative regulations, you're asking a lot of an entity or a group who doesn't fully have that knowledge base that maybe you have when you're ready to present this and ask for these things. And that's why, again, it's very important to keep everyone at all the stakeholder levels involved in the process and the plan as you go through. So then for portions like this, you can escalate this. If you are just a department lead, you can escalate this to your district leadership who is on your team. Or maybe even you guys have a board member who may be on the team to help implement the process or build the process so that you have people at every stakeholder level involved in the construction of the process every step of the way. Will make all of these conversations a little bit easier to have. And then the last step would be to communicate the new process with your staff and your sites. Like anything else you implement, there's going to be a learning curve. Training is going to have to be given. And so again, having those stakeholders, those teachers, the grade level chairs, your principals involved in this process every step of the way is what's going to help you to be super successful when it comes to the implementation stage. And then I want to just kind of turn it over for a few minutes and allow Oak Grove to kind of share what their district perspective on everything we've just talked about, including all of your level stakeholders and how that has worked in their district.
Yeah, thanks, Libby. Yeah, so with the checklist and the tool, we certainly wish that we had those items when we were starting out, because it would have been really helpful. But I wouldn't say that you have to have everything, all the ducks lined up in a row in order to start. It's something that you're constantly coming back to and reusing and reviewing all the time. So we, in our process, wanted to make sure that the process was as easy as possible for ourselves, as well as for vendors that we're reaching out to, as well as people within the district. So it was a lot of process of trying to fine tune some of our tools to make sure that could happen. Also involving other departments within our district was extremely important, creating that sense of education within the district so that everybody is kind of on the same page. It was great when we were able to get purchasing in the business department to get on board with this, right? And basically anything that comes from school sites dealing with technology, they say, hey, does this need student data privacy? And sometimes we're like, yeah, we'll get on it, we'll send it to them. Other times we're like, no, you're just buying a projector, you don't need the student data privacy on that. So, but we'd rather have them, err on the side of caution than not at all. So it's great having that that team as well. Some of the things that we are still working on are trying to get the board policy administrative regulations in place. We were starting to work on that, and then shelter in place happened, the pandemic happened. So that kind of got put on hold while we're focused on other important things. So I'm sure this next year we'll be reviewing that and going back to that and kind of seeing what we can do with that particular piece. We've also used numerous tools. So when we were starting out, it was mostly using a lot of free tools that we had, like Google Forms, add-on to Google Forms called Form Publisher, things like that, getting the workflow of who needs to access that document at what stage and so forth. And then a couple of years ago, we moved as a district, we purchased a product called Inform K-12, which is kind of like a PDF editor, if you will, and that can control workflow and things like that. But so we use them to create the form that is sent out to the vendors, and they can fill in the pertinent information. And it's nice because we can say, oh, they can only fill in these pieces of information. They can't edit the underlying PDF and things along those lines. So that is super helpful because we don't get, ones that they've tried to edit and then send back to us and not tell us what they edited. And then we're trying to search and figure out where they made changes. And then as far as like letting staff know about things, we had a huge campaign right at the beginning about checking the apps before you start using them with your students, that type of thing, as well as contacting the ed tech team. We would then post some of that information online with Awesome Tables. Unfortunately, Awesome Tables, I think, started charging for things, so we had to move away from that. And we actually just recently, our district purchased another product, Learn Platform, so that we can kind of show some of that vetting information. They purchased it for other purposes as well, but that also helped with the gathering of information about where students and staff are going and what sites they're actually utilizing, because that was another big piece. We were relying before on basically, teachers telling us, whether they're using a product, and of course, sometimes they didn't, whether they chose not to, or it just didn't occur to them. So that sometimes that happens as well. So having a product that can, scan your network and give you feedback upon where they're going, that can be extremely helpful as well.
And it's a new process, right? So this process takes time. Mm-hmm. I know that Oak Grove has been working at this for quite some time, quite some number of years, and still, we're still in the final phases, or they're still in the final phases of completing all of the steps that we just talked about. So it takes time. Be gentle on yourself as you work through the process. It's a new process for everyone in your district. And if I could give one piece of advice I wish somebody would have told me is support. Offer as much support as you can to your district staff, to all of your levels of stakeholders, because they're going to be looking to you. If you're attending this webinar, you're probably going to be heading up this massive project, right? And this push for, it's really a cultural change. But at the end of the day, it is meant to provide equity to all of your students. And it is meant to not put a barrier, which is how some of your staff may see this when you first roll it out. But it's not meant to be a barrier. It's meant to be one of those things that we keep in place. Like I said, like on the playground, we have monitors, we have people who are there to help our students to climb the jungle gym and make sure the jungle gym is safe. This is no different. We are trying to keep our students safe while providing equity And that's why it's vital to offer that support at every level, but also to keep them all in the mix as you build what your plan is going to look like for your district. Thank you so much, Steve. Let's see. So now we have some time for some reflection activities. So we want to hear from you guys. We want to talk about what does it look like in your district currently. And so while I'm talking, go ahead and feel free to hop into this. It's a Padlet, so feel free to use your QR code there. But based on the Student Data Privacy Roadmap, what is your district status in the implementation process? So we'd like to hear where you guys are at with this process. Let me give you guys a few minutes. Let me stop sharing real quick. I want to open up this Padlet and share it with everyone. So feel free to just hop in there and heart whichever status that you guys are on. I think you guys all can unmute, so if anybody's having any issues, let us know. And while you guys are doing that, I just want to go over to this screen really quick. So this is what you guys should be seeing on your Padlet. And we just want to kind of hear from everybody and see where are you at in the process.
Hi, Libby. Danya here. Sorry, can you share the Padlet link again?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's see. There you go. Are you able to see that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
The only thing is that we have to do it on our phones, right? Okay. QR code. Okay.
Give you guys just another minute. I kind of threw that one at you. And for those of you, oops, let me go back. I'm going to go ahead and put the link in the chat as well. So quite a few people on the first few steps. And that's pretty much mainstream for what when we're working with other districts, what we're seeing as well. A lot of districts are just undertaking this whole task. Like I said, it's a very time-consuming process. It's going to take time. Make sure that you're having the appropriate conversations, and we're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. But as you can see, it's pretty common for districts to be in their first few phases. And the whole purpose of this reflection is just to kind of gauge where you guys are at personally in your district, but also to show you that you're not alone. A lot of districts struggle with this, and the one thing I hear from a lot of districts are they ask, you know, how are other districts doing it? Am I that far on the totem pole that I'm doing something wrong? And that couldn't be further from the truth. And that is the purpose of this particular exercise. So you guys can see here that there's going to be a wide spread of where districts are in the process, but majority of our districts in California are just getting started, and we're technically considered ahead of the curve on this. We do a lot of work in other states as well, and they're not even having the conversation about implementing a plan. They're just barely, you know, talking about contracting and new laws that are coming out. So always feel as though you can come to your peers for support. We have a wide network of districts, like I said, who are willing to help and mentor other districts who are on this path. Similar is another reflection that we want to talk about. Gauge where your district is in the compliance process. So if you're using that checklist that we talked about, and I'm going to go ahead and put this link in the chat as well. If you're using that same checklist, where are you guys at? Gauge yourself on that checklist where you are at in your district. And so for this one, you're just going to want to put a grade at the bottom of that image there. And here is your link for that if you don't have access to a QR scanner. And this one we're not going to dive too deep into, but a lot of districts, again, you're going to see are just barely starting out. And that is perfectly okay. But it's really important to stop and take a second to gauge where you guys are at in this process in your own district. So that you know, hey, do we need to pause and maybe backpedal? Maybe we need to include a few different stakeholder levels here, or are we already on par and do we just keep plowing through and talk about all these things at all these different levels? So self-reflection is always really important in implementing any plan, and a district plan is no different. So as we move forward with the workshop, we want to talk about some hypothetical situations and some examples that could pop up or typically do pop up in districts. And so this first one here, I'm an educator and I want to be proactive in ensuring that the resources I'm using in my classroom are safe for my students. What are some tips for best practices? And so what we've laid out here, and this is, again, it's downloadable, printable, if this fits what stage you're at in your district, is really to just follow the district's policies and procedures, assuming that they exist, right? So this is the whole purpose of developing and implementing this plan. You want to make sure that when you have staff who's looking to you guys for guidance, that you do have policies and procedures in place. Vetting resources to be used in the classroom is vital and important to keeping our students safe and to making sure that your district is not vulnerable and that they are compliant with all of the privacy laws that we have here in California. As a parent has come to the school and has a question about what information we are sharing and how we are ensuring student data privacy. What is the best way to explain what we are doing to keep students safe? So this one I want to talk about a little bit because in 2018, the California Consumer Privacy Act came about. And so prior to 2018, this was a much harder conversation to have because a lot of our stakeholders, a lot of our parents, a lot of our staff even were unaware that when you download an application, even as a consumer, it's no different, that you are giving permission for that application to collect certain data on you. Not just at the time of purchase, but as you're using it in some cases, and they vary. And so you really have to pay attention to what did you just give that application permission to access, and it's no different in schools. So it's important for your stakeholders at all levels to know and understand these things that are happening when we're using technology in the classroom, to know the laws and to apply them appropriately to each application that we're vetting and using. It's vital. And you could potentially get parents who know their rights, that know the laws that have come down, and ask these types of questions. And so your district has to be prepared. The database model that a lot of California districts are using offers the ability to share all the data elements with the stakeholders. We always give you the option to share or not share at that moment. You can still collect the data elements that are being collected and you can implement them into this particular database, but to actually share those with your stakeholders It's going to be important and vital to have that level of transparency if needed, but you also don't want to put things out kind of cart before the horse, right? So if you haven't educated your community and you haven't had these conversations with your staff and your parents and your stakeholders, it could be alarming for you to put out there that, hey, we're sharing all these data elements with this application. So you want to make sure that you're having those types of conversations. And there's a couple other ones here. So my district does not currently have any policy or procedure for vetting, approving, or monitoring resources being used in the classroom. What steps can I take to begin the conversations about developing and implementing such process and procedure? Again, I want to point out that a lot of these hypothetical scenarios that we do see, they circle around communication. And so we are going to spend a good amount of time for the rest of the session talking about how do you communicate, because that is really key. So support and communication are going to be key to developing and implementing a successful plan. I hear people talking about digital citizenship and student data privacy. What is the difference and how do they affect each other? This one, I want you guys all to download and take a look at this last hypothetical, because this is very important, especially as you're developing and implementing your plan. They're both important, but they are both very different. We need to teach digital citizenship in the classrooms to students, parents, again, all levels of stakeholders, but that's teaching them how to be responsible and how to navigate through all of these digital tools that we are now using, right, responsibly and effectively. And so there's tons of training out there about that, but when you talk about the compliance of student data privacy, you're talking more about your contracting, you're talking more about this plan that we're trying to implement to vet those resources. So you can liken the two to the student privacy piece is your plan that you're implementing, and your backbone, your policies, your board regulations, things like that, on how you're going to protect student privacy, how you're going to vet and deploy those resources and make that selection. And then digital citizenship will come in right behind that and be the support and the education around actually using those applications responsibly. So communication and implementation, we've talked a lot about that, and I want to just talk for a moment about district perspectives and how each level of stakeholders has their own priorities as they pertain to privacy. And so there's an advocacy piece that we advocate here for at CITE and CCEE. And that's going to be circling around creating the process and procedure. How do you create the process and procedure to uphold student data privacy? And then from the legal analysis portion, again, this is pulled from our webinar we did with F3 legal firm to give you guys kind of that advocacy and legal perspective. But here's the legal analysis on what we're talking about today. From the district leadership and school board perspective, there's vulnerability and risk if you don't have a plan in place. We constantly get warnings from two districts, specifically from the FBI and the CDE, that we're vulnerable to additional risks and additional liabilities. And so if we're not helping to protect our students and to mitigate those vulnerabilities, that could be a problem potentially. And so we want to always start with what are the priorities, and those should be the priorities for the district leadership and your school board's level. So digging into that a little bit further, we have all of these sample language and guides on the webpage that break it down by stakeholder and how do you have these conversations? What do you need to talk about? What key points should be touched on? So district leadership conversations, this is your guide or your talking points, if you will, for discussing student data privacy with internal leadership, your superintendents and your school boards. So a couple pieces that you should hit on. Does our district have a board policy about student privacy? Does our district have a process for vetting new applications and programs? Why is it important? This is a big one. You have to really bring that into the perspective of why should your district leadership or your school board think that this is an important topic to talk about? Why is it important to our school board and districts to adopt a policy and procedure for student privacy? And that relates back to the legal analysis that we got from our F3 partners. What laws do we need to comply with? What happens if we do not have student privacy policies and procedure? Again, that vulnerability and liability piece we talked about. who will have a role in the process, and what will our plan look like, and how will we communicate the process, or I'm sorry, the policy and procedure to stakeholders. And so these are things that are important to make sure that you're talking about and you're discussing with your high level leadership. How do you actually formulate all of those talking points into verbiage? And so we've taken all of the knowledge of a team who has worked in this field for a while, and we've drafted sample letters, sample communication that you can give to your school board when presenting maybe a board item, or maybe you're just trying to get the ball rolling. And so we have some internal leadership sample language available as a resource as well as you work through this process. Your technology, business and education services people. So these are the leadership people, like I said, that typically are heading these types of plans and really guiding the rest of the stakeholders. So the advocacy piece for your priorities, working together to design and implement a privacy process and relevant procedures. And again, you have that legal analysis side that we brought in with that webinar. And so again, risk and liability is a priority for these entities as well. They're also focusing on funding audits and those liabilities. Are you utilizing the money that your district is getting for the appropriate purposes and in accordance with the laws? And then, of course, we want to make sure that we are partnering and procuring with safe vendors. And all of these things are priorities for this level of stakeholders. Right below that, you have your teachers, or in tandem with, you have your teachers and your staff. These are our frontline people who are going to know what applications are the best suited for their students. They are going to be that front line that's going to tell you, these are the applications that we need. Now, can we take it a step further? Can we vet it for all of the things, curriculum alignment, cost to deploy and support, and then of course, privacy. And so your teachers and staff have their own privacy priorities that they're going to want to touch on as well. We want to make sure that you are empowering and encouraging them to be a part of this team. They are going to be a vital portion of this team. They're going to want to know which apps are safe to use. Like I said, they're going to be your frontline who's going to know these are the best applications to provide the education that I'm trying to provide to my students. Now let's work together to make sure that that is a safe and viable option. And then the legal analysis is basically help me help you. We want to work together as a team. And we want their input, and we need their assistance in guidance on what applications should we be looking at and vetting. And then we have to help them to make sure that they know and understand why it's important that we have to vet these things for privacy. You have Ferpa and also safety impacts. And so we have to work together and that help me help you kind of model. How do you talk to this level of stakeholders? And again, we have, they're very similar points of discussion that you would have with your other stakeholders, but what are the criteria that you will use to vet new applications? And so I touched on the curriculum piece. Maybe your district has a funding piece that needs to be analyzed prior to purchase. How many teachers are wanting to use this application, so on and so forth. And how often will your new group that you're going to form meet to vet these requests? We want to make sure that time is of the essence for all of these things, because your teaching staff, when they request them, they're going to need them right then and there. And so we want to fine tune this process as much as we possibly can, and then educate and support along the way to make sure that all of your teaching staff knows exactly what the expectation is as you filter through and implement this process. A couple of things here. So we do have additional resources on building those teams specifically on our website at studentdataprivacy.net. A lot of work has been done around creating those teams and utilizing those teams as well. Again, what if you have to formulate all of that, not just a talking conversation, but what if you have to formulate this in the form of a letter or in the form of an official request? how do you take all of that information and really hit on the perspectives and priorities of this stakeholder group and get your point across while appropriately having the discussion? And so we have your department leads sample letter or formal request as well. Again, for your teaching staff as well. So we try to separate the two. Both entities and both levels of stakeholders are doing tremendous work at their level, but there's different discussion points that should be hit on when you're actually formalizing your communications with these two levels of stakeholders. Your next one is your next level of stakeholders are your family and students. What are their privacy priorities? And number one is always going to be transparency. Do you know what data is being shared and with whom? So we get a few districts every once in a while who will say, how do you have the conversation with parents? How do you talk about that? And so the more transparent that you can be with your stakeholders at this level, your family, your students, your community, the better it's going to be for you guys doing the work in your districts, because you have parents who want to know, they want to be involved, and they want to be made aware of how you're protecting their students when they're in your care. And so that transparency piece is going to be paramount, but not without support and conversation first, as to not cause a panic. And then that legal analysis, understanding the governing laws. So Ferpa exceptions and AB 1584 are really huge. So PIPA has come up a lot. With SOPIPA, we talk about how vendors can use your data that is shared for the purpose of providing a specific service. So what does that mean? That means that if the school district shares student data and or parent data in order to provide a specific service from a vendor, they cannot turn around then and use that for purposes of advertising other products to you as the parent or the student or the teacher. And so PIPA is very specific on those pieces. Before I go on, I think there was a question. Let me see. Let's touch on that real quick. So the question, what messaging was sent out to teachers before starting this venture? I can see a lot of teachers freaking out about possibly losing access to apps, and they've been using for a long time. So from experience, you have to be very careful about the timing of your communication. And so to this point, everything that we've touched on and talked about in building your plan should be with a subset or a specific group of your teaching staff who is typically those grade level chairs or your principals to help develop what the plan is going to look like before you mass communicate to everyone about a new plan that your district may be implementing. And so that's why it's so vital to have your teachers, whether it be grade level chairs or just teachers who are heavily involved in tech, or just teachers who you guys trust maybe in your district who have been around for a long time and have a lot of perspective and say. And so you want to make sure that you're keeping them looped in every step of the way to make sure that whatever process or plan that your district implements or builds, by the time it gets to implementation, that it's aligned with what your teachers are going to be doing as best as possible. I see Sergio unmuted. Did you have something to add from the district perspective on that?
Yeah, I just real quick. That was kind of our concern in the beginning too. It's like, oh my gosh, here we are, the privacy police. We're going to shut everybody down and then not make any friends in the process. So one of the things that helped with that is we started, like you mentioned, with the stakeholders at the district level. We met with the administration and the principals during their meeting, kind of like informing what the laws are, what our obligations are to stay compliant, and why it's important. So get the buy-in that way. Steve mentioned briefly that we made really close ties with the business department, so that kind of put up a big, kind of floodgate there, which helped quite a bit. But I think the thing that made the most difference, and I don't know if every district has this ability, but depending on where you're coming from, the three of us are teachers on special assignment. We belong to the teachers union in our district. We made it a point to go to one of our union meetings and present to the teachers from that perspective, saying, look, this is to protect you also. You don't want to be the one that's on the hook for giving the student information out to a vendor that wasn't handling it properly, because it comes back to you. So protect yourself before you give the information out. and here are some things that could help. And then always made it a point, just like you mentioned, be the support. Tell them they're not the ones that have to read the terms of service. They don't have to read the privacy policies. Fill out the little Google form. It's 2 questions. We'll do the heavy lifting. We'll let you know when it's safe to use. And instead of saying like, oh, you can't use it, it's more of like, is it safe to use and protect you and then protect the students. And I think that there's a little bit more buy-in there without having it be the privacy police, because then they understand that, oh, this is for my safety as well. This is to protect me if there's litigation or something like that.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I was going to say also, we for the first year that we were telling teachers about this, we didn't block anything, and even now we don't really block that much. There's only a few things that we block that we know to be pretty egregious. And so we'll block those, but most things we don't. And it's more of like, hey, don't use this product, but we're not on the back end blocking it from teachers being able to access.
Yeah, because if we put ourselves in their shoes too, maybe they're 3 weeks into a project that they're using an app for, and then all of a sudden we learn about it from another school site. If we were to block it and the phone rings over here, it's like, my project's dead in the water. It's like, oh, well, we did that to you because somebody else followed the rules and you may have missed it. So if we find out that it's being used, we tend to update the status saying like not approved. And then at the end of the summer or the school year, if we need to block, if it's that bad, then we will. But a lot of times even blocking it isn't necessarily fixing the problem, because there's always the opportunity, if necessary, for a parent waiver to come in. And if a parent waiver comes in, now we have to be really careful of, well, we blocked it because it's not approved, but we have a school over here that has a parent waiver on file. So we have to unblock it. So like Steve said, we tend not to block things, but we make it really easy to get to the database and make it really easy to get status updates. So we're not necessarily doing the lock and unlock, switches all the time.
Right. And like, it's really important what you said too. So as much as we try to make this a one size fits all, right, it's not always going to be, and there's going to be those one-off scenarios. And in those cases, there are things like parent waivers. You're not completely protected from or opted out of all of these laws and their compliance, but things like Ferpa or parental consent. So now you've put your parent on notice, and so they're working with the same level of information that you have to make these decisions. And so having that parental waiver is sometimes something that has to come into play because it's not just always a one size fits all. Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Yes.
Okay, so back to talking to your families and your communities, right? So that's a really good thing too. So that transparency piece is going to be vital, not just to your staff, but to your parents and your stakeholders. And we have to make sure that we are talking to them in terms that they understand, right? So I know working in a district, we kind of get accustomed to using our acronyms and things like that. So you want to make sure that when it's time to have these conversations with your stakeholders at the community and parental level, that you're making sure that it's information that they can digest and that they can understand. So they're going to ask you questions like, why are you sharing my students' data with vendors at all? Because again, we have to put ourselves in their shoes and realize these are conversations and these are things that are happening in our world that they may not be accustomed to, or they may not know. They may not realize when they say yes to downloading the application on their phone that it's sharing data automatically. And so it's our job to come in and say, here's what's happening every time you download an application and educate them. Is sharing my students' data legal? Yes, it is. FERPA gives us the exception to share data for the very specific purposes of providing a service. And so the school districts have that legal ability to share student data for very specific purposes. But that being said, we don't want to always do that without our community's knowledge and without our parental knowledge and partnership on that. And that's why it's really important, again, to have this level stakeholder be involved in that process. As the Oak Grove team said, being that there are teachers talking to teachers, it's a much broader conversation and it's a much easier to digest conversation if you're talking to your peers, right? So it's no different in this aspect. So if you include those stakeholders, they are going to be the key to communicating with other stakeholders on their level and of their peers. Questions about consent, questions about why you're sharing, what you're sharing, those are all questions to expect from your parents and stakeholders in your community. This is a sample letter, again, that can be customized to talk about when you're ready to deploy this map or this process. How do you talk about it? How do you share the information in a way that's digestible, but yet customized to your district and your policies? And I don't want to go in depth about this letter, but I want to say that at the very end, you give them an option and somebody who's available to support them, to answer their questions and to guide them through this new process, just as you would your teaching staff or any other level of stakeholder. And then lastly, we do want to touch on vendor partners. So again, it sounds a little bit odd, but we do educate our vendor partners as much or sometimes more than our district stakeholders. And so it's really important to also know, how do you communicate when you get questions from your vendors? What kinds of questions are they going to have? And so we do have these pieces as well. So how do you talk about the fact that you have to have a contract in place and what that means and what your policies are? And again, here's sample verbiage that you can use when you're talking with your vendors as well. Guys, I know you guys touched on the question that we had in the middle of that, but I do want to give the Oak Grove team the opportunity to touch on any other perspective at the district that they may have as it pertains to communication when you're implementing.
So some of the communication language that you presented in those sample languages, I think is very useful, because then it makes it sound like, even though you're sending it from a district email address, it's not just like, hey, random vendor, I'm a random person that works at a random school district. It's more of, this is official language from either the state or from CITE or from the national agreement, that and then give the reference to the laws and why we're doing this. I think it tends to get more attention, instead of it being just like, hi, sign this thing, please, and here's a random link. It's just a little bit more official. And I think that helps quite a bit. So using some of that template language really does help. And then just maybe, I don't know if I saw it here yet, or if we can maybe touch on it later, but having some canned responses to some of the very common replies that the vendors will give. Because at the beginning, we were getting a lot of the, oh, we're a nonprofit, we don't have to do this, but you still have to follow the law. So there was kind of like some templates that we had canned for responses. Sometimes it got to the point where it was basically like, well, if you're declining to sign, we'll mark you as declined on the national database. And then they got to thinking what that really meant. And not that we want to play hardball all the time, but a lot of times the sales tactics of some of these vendors are basically like, well, we'll look at it once you have a contract signed. But in our district's policy basically is, we're not going to sign a contract or MOU until we have this on file. And so kind of coming up with where you're going to stand your ground and what wiggle room you're going to have if they want to make red line changes and such. That's things that we've kind of learned along the way of where to kind of draw the line.
Yeah, we at least want to let them know it's worthy of the conversation, at least, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing, we're trying to streamline everything. We do have some canned responses we're working on updating a lot of those at studentdataprivacy.net, but there are a few available there now, and we will probably touch base with you guys very shortly, because Oak Grove has really fine-tuned this process, like I said, as they've worked through it. And this is about helping each other and mentoring each other. And the fact that you guys starting out have a network of people who have been doing this work for a very long time that are more than happy to assist and help. Like you said, Sergio, we're trying to streamline the communications that are going out to our vendors for sure. Great. Okay, so let's do another reflection activity to kind of see where you guys are. I'm going to put this in the chat here. So in case you need the link, here's the link. And then we all. So let's talk about, has anybody held conversations about student data privacy planning with any level of stakeholder yet? And so if you look at that Padlet, there's a thumbs up, thumbs down. So thumbs up, thumbs down, if you've had the conversation with any of these levels of stakeholders. Give you guys just a minute to complete that activity. Again, everybody is as we work with lots of different districts on, and we touch on implementing a process, the communication piece comes towards the very end. And so there's nothing wrong. You're not doing anything wrong. You're not behind the game or anything of that nature. If these are things that you have not touched on yet, these are pieces that, again, you guys can take and fine tune to your district, and no one is going to know any of level of stakeholder better than you will in your own district. So take the guidance and customize it as you need to within your district. Let's see, so we have our next reflection here. So which stakeholder group may be the hardest to discuss the plan with? Again, this is all anonymized responses and not meant to call anyone stakeholder situation out, but we can help each other and support each other with, hey, this is what worked. And I know this conversation was a stressful one to go into. I know for me, talking to at the board level, presenting at a board meeting and talking with our district leadership, our superintendents, was the most nerve-wracking for me. And so the purpose of this exercise is to get some feedback and input on how did this work for you? And even though you were nervous, how did you handle that situation? And do you have any tips and tricks that you can share with the rest of us who may be nervous about having that same conversation at that level? So again, you have your QR code and then you have your link, and then it's just a rating system. So, and this also helps us on this end to say, okay, well, majority of our districts are really nervous and really stressed about going into that district leadership conversation, or they're really stressed and nervous about the parents and community and how they're going to sync up with that stakeholder group. Maybe we should focus our efforts on creating additional resources to help you guys through that portion of communication. So make sure you let us know how you're feeling about having all of these conversations at these different levels. All right. So moving on, we want to touch on, again, support is of the essence for all of the things that we're doing, all the things that you're going to be doing. You want to make sure that you have a very strong support line of support or escalation that people can talk to. And even outside of the plan, even after you implement, it's really important to continuously give support and guidance and information and communicate really well with all of your stakeholders. And so we've put together a couple webinars that are available on the website. We talked with Gretchen Shipley, who is a partner at Fagan, Friedman, and Full Frost F3. They support a lot of districts here in California, and she shared a lot of great legal information on all things student privacy and how those perspectives are working, and information that your district really needs to know as you work through an implementation process, some of those important legal aspects that are going to pop up. And so that is available for your support and guidance from us. We've also done, privacy in the pandemic is also going to be coming out. So we can talk about privacy, student privacy, and how to implement a plan, how things have operated under quote unquote normal circumstances. But we all know that 2020 was a huge challenge for all of us. And the pandemic brought about its own privacy questions, concerns that we all had to kind of pivot and figure out on our own. And so we want to pull all of that knowledge into this webinar. And so we're going to be talking about privacy in the pandemic. How did things change? How did districts pivot successfully, unsuccessfully? And so I want to take a second now to talk about that with you guys. So a little bit of a reflection. Again, we can improve with reflections. And so how have things changed in your district as far as privacy with the pandemic? And what supports will you need moving forward to implement an appropriate student privacy compliance plan? So again, this is not just something that we put out the resource and okay, we're done. This is an ongoing support plan that we offer through CITE, and CCEE has their own additional resources as well. And coming together and partnering for you guys has been a great experience for us because we can give back and we can provide all of the support and resources as a team that the districts are actually needing at this point in time. And so here's your QR code for that. And let me give you guys the link as well. And this is just meant to be a stream of information on how you guys are handling things and where you need additional supports on privacy in the pandemic. So here's your link if you prefer that method. And then we also have that QR code to provide some of that input. And so we will leave these boards open to gather that information, to make sure that we are touching on all of the things that you guys need from us and all of the resources and support. Again, support communication, that's key to any plan. And that includes at this high level of where we're trying to help give you guys guidance and direction and how to create these plans and how to implement these plans. So we want to make sure our lines of communication and our guidance and support are available and open to you guys long after this workshop as well. I'm going to go ahead and pause there while everyone is kind of putting in that information. Team at Oak Grove, feel free to unmute and give your perspective on anything privacy in the pandemic. How have things adjusted and shifted, or have you guys had to pivot at all with your privacy plan that was already implemented through the pandemic?
I don't think we had to shift too much. It was nice that we had started this much earlier because it meant that most of the vendors that we used during the pandemic had already been vetted and signed off and everything. So there's only a couple that we had to reach out to and interact with. Yeah, I don't know if Bruce and Sergio has.
I think Zoom may have been our biggest hurdle there, because of course, when everything went virtual, the first thing everybody thought of was the word Zoom, because that just was the only word they knew. We use Google Hangouts Google Meets in our district, and which fit the bill for what we needed to do. And we did not have a data privacy agreement with Zoom. And so that was just kind of a little bit of a hurdle we had to get everybody on board with, but it seemed to work out okay.
Yeah, and I think that for those of you who are just beginning this journey or kind of thought about it over the past year or so, but really felt like, okay, now's the time. I think the pandemic, just because we had to go to full distance learning, it opened a lot of eyes to what's out there, because it became, I think for some districts, it was probably a bit Wild West, like how am I going to digitize all this stuff overnight? And so now you have the opportunity, perhaps with some one-time monies, to invest in some ways to visualize what occurred over the past year and a half, and then really kind of see what it is that you can point at. And there's a lot of support from CITE, in regards to their database, where you can just simply kind of get onboarded with the process and just piggyback on a lot of stuff that's out there and just get it going, and then get that buy-in. Because I think that a lot of people, in the upper management, executive team, working with ESD and then talking to business, they probably during this time were freaking out, especially business. Like right now, there's so many people are saying, I want this, I want that, and the money's there. When you have that privacy piece in line, it helps them to maybe direct it a little bit better, and then ESD to streamline where that curriculum, how it's going to achieve those goals in the classroom setting. So it's a good opportunity right now for those of you, because you do have people that are, you have some opportunities, and you have support. Like, Libby's, they just opened up recently being able to do a lot of that stuff, that heavy lifting, that the logistical process. Get on board with that, because maybe you have the opportunity this year to spend some money sort of looking at ways to invest in that, and it would be well worth it, because now you build the culture of this change and the importance, because it's at the forefront of all of your stakeholders' minds right now is like your moment.
Yeah, another thing that we've noticed too over the last year or so is that there's a lot of vendors that you may already be subscribing to that start integrating some of these dashboards. So Steve mentioned early on that we have subscribed to Learn platform for a few different reasons, but Learn does give us the analytics of where our kids are going and what EdTech apps are being used. And it's Clever, if you're a Clever district, they have an EdTech dashboard analytics also, which show you what apps are being used, even if they're not ones that you're pushing out through the Clever portal. They're just collecting the data of where the kids are going. And there's other classroom management tools that do some of this as well. So you might not have to buy a special product just for this. You might already have something integrated into one of your systems that you might not have realized, but it does give you a little bit of an eye-opening or just a view into where a lot of teachers and students are visiting EdTech apps from.
And to answer Claudia's question about timing, like we don't really have a timeline for ourselves, because vendors, we know there are some vendors that we send it to them and 24 hours later they've signed it and filled it out and they're done, right? Other vendors, and Libby knows these because we usually end up involving her, like there's some vendors that we've been working on for 3 years and they still haven't signed with us. So
the only time we run into timing issues is when a teacher doesn't follow the process. So they'll like buy something, turn in a receipt, they spend it on money on their credit card or what have you. They turn a reimbursement receipt in, the principal will sign off on it, send it to business, and the business won't cut the check because it's not privacy approved. And so if they kind of went around without asking first, those timelines, the teachers will basically say, well, where's my money? And then we have to wait until they get privacy approval.
Yeah, I would agree. That's why I think for us, the biggest win, obviously involving ESD early, so they understand the why, the importance there. And then with business, specifically purchasing, because the money is where it's at. If you are not going to get reimbursed for that $500, you are going to hesitate spending it out of your pocket. Teachers still do this, but still that's an incentive for them. And then big purchases, district level, there's an agreement that must all go through this process. So that helped a lot too. And we've actually turned down large purchases, big vendors, which ties to a previous discussion earlier in regards to if they're not already signing on to that, and they say, well, we're not going to sign anything until you are going to purchase this. We've actually even included a language in the MOU saying, okay, here you go, here's your PO. However, us continuing with this process and actually doing this is contingent upon you doing this process to protect the student's data. And then they'll head nod because they want the sale, and now they're tied to doing it. Even that way, so that way it's like, we're going to meet you in the middle. We understand you want us to agree to purchase your project or product, and we want it, but we also want you to protect our students' data. And that seems to have helped as well. Just bring it in that MOU. That worked out a lot.
Oftentimes we'll also, like if a vendor comes and says, hey, can we do a demo for you or something like that? Can we try and pitch you our product? Then we'll say, before you even pitch it to us, here to take care of this issue, the data privacy issue, because if you're not agreeing to data privacy, why even bother pitching to us? Because we're not going to go with it.
Yeah, one of the things that helps is in that email that Steve's just mentioning to reach out to that vendor that wants to do the sales pitch. Part of our language says this is basically what we need to have on file from you, but there might be one on the national database already. Here's the link. And then if they're like, oh, this is silly, as soon as they click that national database and they see the big list of vendors that have already done this, they realize at that point, oh, this is for real. It's not just something Oak Grove wants. This is a national database with a bunch of my competitors' names on here. And as soon as they see their competition already signing, it's a big incentive for them to get on board.
Yeah, we so on that note, Zoom actually came to us when the pandemic first hit, and they said, hey, we've been approached by a ton of districts that want to deploy our product for, support during the pandemic, but they're all asking for this. How do we do this? And within a week, we had that contract signed. And so I think that lends to how we're trying to approach this, from supporting each other, district to district. Things are going to vary, but we're all in the same boat, and we're all trying to get to the same end goals, to keep our students safe, give them that level of equity, and to protect our teachers and give them a process to follow as well. And so those are all extremely great tips. And one big thing that I saw streamlined through all of your tips and support answers there and your guidance, you guys, was how vital it actually is to have each level stakeholder involved in every bit of that process. Absolutely. And so as we kind of come to a close, I want to touch on a couple of things that I also heard in there. We have a ton of resources available outside of just the CCEE resources that we've touched on today. If you want to see more of those resources on the app vetting teams and maybe some more language on how to respond to vendors, we have more resources at studentdataprivacy.net on our site homepage, and those are all available for you guys as well. And I want to touch on, so CITE did launch a new program where a lot of our districts, the response has been, this is all great guidance to put the plan in place, but even when the plan is in place, we don't have the personnel to support. As Claudia mentioned in her question, some of these contracts, you're going to go back and forth with vendors and they lag. And how do you have the conversation to kind of propel that forward? And we have some great expertise in that area. We work with people like Oak Grove, who are highly familiar with the vendor community and help to get those contracts pushed along. And so Privacy Services is a new program that CITE has launched this year to help districts who may be struggling with those types of issues. And that's available at citeprivacy.org for more information on that, or reach out to us. So a ton of resources. That's what we're all about. That's what we're trying to help you guys with as you implement this process. And we hope that you guys found the workshop helpful. We hope that the resources will be helpful guidance to you guys, and take them, customize them to your district and your community and how they're going to work best for you guys. But with the last 15 minutes, we want to open it up for any questions that you guys may have on any of the resources that we've touched on today, or any of the topics. Please feel free to unmute at this point, and we're willing to have some good conversation and answer any questions that may be lingering for you guys. And if you have to hop, thank you guys so much for joining us. And this recording will be available on our website. Thank you guys so much. And thank you, team at Oak Grove, for helping us and joining us today with your district perspective. And of course, a huge thanks to Ronnie Jones and her team at CCEE as well. Thank you, guys.
Not a question, Libby, but just want to say thank you for doing all that work. I know you're always sending this information over to us on the CITE team, and thanks to the Oak Grove guys as well. They're always a great resource.
They are absolutely a wealth of knowledge.
They
and
are.
we've worked together for a long time on this topic. So thank you so much for joining us today, Claudia, and we hope that it was helpful in your mapping, planning, and communication for implementing your plan.